The sun was setting over the small town, casting a warm, golden hue over everything. In the distance, a faint silhouette of a person stood, eyes wide, staring at the scene in front of them. The air seemed still, heavy with the weight of the moment. Emily's heart raced as she stepped forward, each footstep echoing in the silence of the world around her. Her brother, lying motionless in the hospital bed, was all she could see. His once vibrant smile now replaced by a hollow expression. She hadn't expected to be here at this crossroads of life and death, with all their shared memories now slipping through her fingers. "Why him?" she whispered as the tears began to fall. The room felt colder, darker, like the life force had drained out of it, leaving nothing but the presence of an inevitable loss. Her hands trembled, unsure whether to touch him or let go of the last thread of hope. Emily sat motionless in the chair beside her brother's bed, her eyes fixed on his pale face, her thoughts racing. She had always been the one who had to keep it together, for him, for everyone else. But now, she felt so small, so helpless. The machines around her beeped in rhythmic intervals, like the ticking of an unwelcome clock. "Why is this happening?" she asked herself, her voice almost a whisper, a fragile crack in her usual resolve. Memories of their childhood rushed back, of laughter, fights, and their shared dreams. Those memories felt so distant now, as if they belonged to someone else. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek, hating the vulnerability she felt. "I can't do this alone," she thought, as her gaze dropped to Jack's lifeless hand, lying motionless in her own. Emily's mind began to drift, but it wasn't the soft comfort of sleep. It was a flood of memories, ones she had tucked away so deeply. She remembered her brother's laugh, how he used to make light of everything. Now his silence was unbearable. Her fingers trembled as she held his hand. She could feel the life draining out of him with each passing second, and she couldn't stop it. "I should have told you how much I love you," she whispered, the words barely leaving her lips. But it was too late for words. The only thing that mattered now was time, and there was so little left. Jack's breath was shallow, and every beat of the heart monitor was a reminder of how little time they had. "I can't lose you," she thought again, wishing desperately that the impossible could somehow be undone. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Emily tried to focus on the sound of the heart monitor, but the beeping was getting slower, more erratic. Her breath quickened, and panic began to rise within her. No, not like this, she thought, her heart pounding in her chest. She needed something to hold on to, something to keep the fear at bay. She remembered their last conversation, the day before everything changed. Jack had smiled, talking about his future plans, plans that would never come to fruition. "I'm here, Jack," she whispered, trying to reassure herself more than him. The room felt colder now, the warmth of the day fading as the evening settled in. The minutes stretched on, feeling like hours. Emily couldn't remember how long she'd been sitting there, her body frozen in place. The weight of the situation pressed on her, suffocating her. Every second that passed felt like another piece of her hope crumbling away. Jack's shallow breathing was the only thing that reminded her that he was still with her, even if just barely. "I can't let go," she thought, her grip tightening on his hand. It was all she had left, this small, fragile connection between them. A memory of their childhood came to her then, when she was the one in need, and Jack had been her protector. She had always relied on him, but now, in his moment of need, she didn't know how to help him. The thought tore at her. She wasn't ready for this. She wasn't ready to lose him. The next morning, the weight of reality was crushing. Emily woke with a jolt, her heart still heavy from the night before. The room was quiet, the only sound coming from the faint hum of the hospital equipment. She hadn't slept. But what good was sleep when her brother's life hung by a thread? She looked over at Jack. His condition hadn't improved overnight. If anything, it had worsened. The nurse had told her to prepare for the worst, but she couldn't bring herself to believe it. Not yet. Her hand reached out to touch his, desperate to feel any sign of warmth. "Come on, Jack. Please come back to me," she whispered, her voice breaking. But his hand remained cold in hers, and the silence in the room felt deafening. The day dragged on in a blur of conversations with doctors, nurses, and strangers who offered empty words of comfort. Emily barely heard them. All she could think about was Jack, how vibrant he had been just a few weeks ago, how full of life. She kept telling herself that he would pull through, but deep down, she knew that hope was fading. She sat by his side, her hand never leaving his, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. It wasn't enough. She needed him awake, needed him to speak to her, to remind her that everything wasn't as hopeless as it seemed. A sudden jolt of anger rose in her chest. Why was this happening to him? To their family? What had they done to deserve this pain? Emily couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. The doctors hadn't said it aloud, but she could see it in their eyes. There was nothing more they could do. The thought made her sick to her stomach. Jack was more than her brother. He was her best friend, her partner in crime, the person who understood her like no one else. She had promised herself that she would always be there for him, but now, with him lying there, she wasn't sure if her presence was enough. She gripped his hand tighter. "Don't leave me, Jack," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. But the room remained silent, and the beeping continued, slower now, more erratic. The weight of her emotions finally broke through. Emily leaned over Jack's bed, her forehead resting on the side of his arm. She didn't care who saw her anymore. She was past the point of caring. "Please wake up, Jack," she begged, her voice trembling. The pain in her chest felt unbearable. She had been strong for so long, but now, in the quiet of the hospital room, her strength faltered. The tears fell freely, her body shaking with the force of her sobs. She had to believe, had to keep hope alive, but the more she tried, the more the reality of the situation pressed down on her. Her brother might be slipping away, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Just as Emily was about to give in to her despair, the door to the room opened. A nurse walked in, offering a soft smile, but it was one Emily barely noticed. She was too lost in her own pain. The nurse checked the machines, adjusting some of the settings, but Emily didn't even look up. "I need you to fight, Jack," she said, more to herself than to him. "I can't lose you." Her voice wavered, but she swallowed her tears. She couldn't afford to lose him, not now. He had always been her anchor, the one person who kept her grounded. But now she was losing that anchor, and she didn't know how to stay afloat without it. The days had started to blend together. Emily barely recognized time anymore, just the quiet rhythm of the beeping machines, the sterile smell of the hospital room, and the flickering of fluorescent lights overhead. Her exhaustion was palpable, but she couldn't leave his side. Not now. She refused to believe the doctor's words. "He's still here," she repeated to herself like a mantra. Jack's condition had worsened, but she couldn't give up on him. Not when he had always been there for her, through every hardship, every loss. She couldn't lose him. She wouldn't. "Please, Jack," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Come back to me." The silence between them was suffocating. Emily had been speaking to him all morning, but no response came. Her words felt hollow, falling into the void of the room. The idea that Jack might not wake up, that she might never hear his voice again, gnawed at her every second. She tried to remind herself of the good times, the laughter they shared, the adventures they had, anything to hold on to. "Please," she whispered again, her hand brushing through his hair. The tears came again, unbidden, flowing freely. "I need you to fight, Jack," she pleaded, not knowing if he could hear her, but desperate for him to try. As the day went on, Emily grew restless. Her frustration was building. She couldn't just sit there and wait. The doctors had done everything they could, but she felt like it wasn't enough. She had to do something, anything. Jack couldn't be gone. She wasn't ready to let go. She wasn't sure if it was hope or desperation that kept her grounded, but something inside her told her to keep fighting. The anger inside her bubbled up again. She had always been strong, but this was testing every ounce of strength she had left. "I won't give up on you," she said through clenched teeth. "Not now." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. She had spent the entire evening walking the hospital halls, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She kept thinking about all the times she had taken Jack for granted. They had always been so close, yet she had never truly expressed how much he meant to her. It was as though she had assumed he would always be there, like he was invincible. Why did I wait? She thought to herself. Why did I wait until it was too late to say what I should have said all along? The guilt gnawed at her. She walked back to Jack's room, looking at him in the bed. "Please, Jack, fight," she whispered, as she took his hand in hers once more. It was the middle of the night when Emily finally allowed herself to rest. She had cried herself dry, her body aching from the emotional toll. As she sat beside Jack, she closed her eyes for a brief moment, just a few seconds of relief from the pain that had consumed her. She could feel the weight of the day, of the last few days, bearing down on her. And just as the darkness of sleep began to pull her in, she felt a soft pressure on her hand. Her eyes flew open. "Jack," she whispered, barely believing it. She looked down at his hand, which was now holding hers with more strength than before. "Please come back to me," she whispered once more, as the room fell into a tense, hopeful silence. The morning light seemed more hopeful today. Emily barely slept, but when she awoke, the room felt different. She hadn't heard the heart monitor beep in the same erratic way. She hesitated for a moment before reaching for Jack's hand, her fingers trembling. Was it possible? Could he be getting better? She rubbed her eyes, willing herself to believe it. The doctors had said there was little chance, but she couldn't help herself. She had to hold on to something. "Please, Jack, wake up," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with urgency. His fingers twitched ever so slightly under her touch, and her heart skipped a beat. Was it a sign? For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. She stayed close to Jack all day, watching for any sign of improvement. He remained mostly unresponsive, but she could see small changes. His breathing was less shallow, his skin not as cold as it had been before. "You're coming back, aren't you?" she whispered, as she gently stroked his hair. But then doubt crept in again. What if this was just a fleeting moment? What if his improvement was temporary? She couldn't think about that now. She had to keep the faith. "Please don't leave me," she said, her voice cracking under the weight of her fear. As the day went on, Emily struggled to find balance between hope and fear. Every small movement, every breath from Jack, sent waves of anxiety through her. She couldn't allow herself to fully believe in his recovery until there was more evidence. Yet, a small part of her wanted to believe. She couldn't help it. "You have to pull through, Jack," she whispered, barely daring to speak the words aloud. It felt selfish, even asking for this much. But she wasn't ready to say goodbye. "I'm not ready," she thought, clutching his hand once again. As night fell, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The beeping of the machine seemed less ominous, less urgent. Was he really improving? She stayed close, her body numb from exhaustion but unwilling to leave his side. The night felt heavier than before, as though the weight of all her emotions had finally caught up with her. "Please stay with me," she whispered, as if she could will Jack to come back. The silence in the room stretched on, but there was a subtle change in the air, a glimmer of possibility she hadn't allowed herself to believe in until now. Jack's hand moved ever so slightly, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. As the night passed, Emily held on to the smallest sign of life from Jack. His hand had moved again, this time with a little more strength. She was afraid to hope too much, but the small changes were undeniable. She refused to leave, even when the nurse suggested it. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly. Jack wasn't awake yet, but she could feel the faint presence of life in the room, a thin thread connecting them. The silence of the hospital room felt less oppressive now, though her heart still raced with fear. "Don't leave me," she whispered one more time, as the soft light of the morning slowly began to fill the room. It had been a few days since Jack showed any signs of improvement, and Emily's heart was cautiously lifting. She still hadn't fully allowed herself to believe, but the changes in his condition were undeniable. His breathing was deeper now, more consistent. There were moments when she thought she could see a flicker of life in his eyes, though he was still too weak to speak. Emily kept talking to him, telling him about the small things she'd been doing, trying to keep him connected to the world outside the hospital room. "I know you can hear me, Jack," she whispered, her voice barely above a murmur. "Please come back to me. I need you." Emily spent hours each day sitting by Jack's side, talking, waiting, hoping for him to wake up. The nurses were cautiously optimistic, but there were no guarantees. Each time he opened his eyes for a few seconds, she felt like her heart stopped. Yet he still didn't speak. Emily's patience began to wear thin, and her frustration grew. "Please don't make me wait any longer," she thought, her hands gripping his. She had been so strong for so long, but it felt like she was crumbling. "Why won't you wake up?" she whispered, her voice breaking with the weight of the unspoken words. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. After a particularly long stretch of silence, Jack stirred. His fingers twitched in her hand, and for a moment, it felt like time had stopped. Emily leaned in closer, her breath catching in her throat. "Is this it?" she wondered. But then Jack opened his eyes, slowly, as though the weight of the world was too much for him to bear. He blinked at her, his gaze unfocused. "You're awake," Emily breathed, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know if he could hear her, but she spoke anyway. "You're awake, Jack." It was a slow process, but Jack was starting to recover. The doctors were cautious, still warning Emily that the road ahead would be long, but for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. Jack could barely speak, his voice hoarse and weak, but when he finally said her name, her heart almost broke. "Emily." His voice was barely audible, but it was enough. She leaned over him, tears spilling down her cheeks as she whispered, "I'm here, Jack. I'm right here." He squeezed her hand, and it felt like a promise that everything would be okay. She wasn't sure if he understood, but it didn't matter. He was fighting. He was still here. The days after Jack woke up were a blur. His recovery, though slow, was steady. Emily stayed by his side, helping him with everything, from eating to small movements, as he regained strength. He had a long way to go, but at least now there was hope. "We're going to make it through this, together," Emily said to him one evening, her voice steady. Jack smiled weakly at her, his eyes still tired but filled with gratitude. He didn't speak much, but the connection between them was stronger than ever. "You'll be okay," she told him, more as a promise to herself than to him. But for the first time, she believed it. The days grew longer as Jack's recovery progressed, though the road was far from easy. Emily could see the strength returning to his eyes, but she could also see the toll it was taking on him. There were moments when he seemed frustrated with his own limitations, moments when he wanted to push through but couldn't. Emily stayed by his side, offering encouragement, even when she too felt exhausted. "We'll get through this," she said quietly one afternoon as she helped him with physical therapy. "One step at a time." Jack looked at her, his expression filled with both appreciation and the frustration of being unable to do more. "I just want to get back to my life," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "I know you do," Emily replied, squeezing his hand. "And you will. Just keep fighting." Every day felt like a small victory. Jack was able to sit up on his own now, and his breathing was steadier. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Emily had started to let her guard down just a little. She allowed herself to smile at the small wins, even though she knew the battle was far from over. One evening, as she helped him to the window to get a glimpse of the world outside, Jack looked at her with a faint smile. "It's nice to see the sun again," he said quietly. "It's been so long." Emily smiled back, her heart swelling with emotion. "The sun's always been there," she said. "And so have I." A week passed, and Jack's strength continued to improve, though his physical therapy was exhausting. Emily never left his side, even when it seemed like he was ready to give up. One afternoon, after a particularly tough session, Jack collapsed back onto his pillow, breathing heavily. "I'm so tired," he muttered, frustration clear in his voice. Emily sat beside him, rubbing his arm gently. "You're doing amazing," she said softly. "I know it feels hard, but you're making progress every day." He turned to look at her, his face filled with vulnerability. "I just want to be okay again." Emily's heart broke at the rawness of his words. "You will be," she whispered. "One day at a time." As the days passed, Jack began to grow stronger, his mood lifting with each small victory. The doctors were hopeful, but Emily knew that there was still a long way to go. She stayed focused, keeping her attention on his recovery, and reminding herself that every step forward, no matter how small, was worth celebrating. One evening, as Jack sat up in his chair for the first time in weeks, he looked at her with a glint of pride in his eyes. "I did it," he said, his voice still weak, but full of determination. Emily smiled, her heart swelling with emotion. "You did," she said, taking his hand. "And you're going to keep doing it. I'll be here for every step." A few more weeks passed, and Jack's recovery began to move from the critical phase to a slower, steadier path. He was able to walk short distances, his strength returning little by little. Emily stood by him through every new milestone, from his first unassisted steps to his first real meal. Each moment felt like a triumph, and each triumph brought them closer to the life they had known before. But, despite the progress, Emily could feel the weight of everything that had happened. The fear, the uncertainty, it was still there, buried beneath the surface. But as Jack sat up in bed one evening, grinning at her with newfound energy, Emily finally allowed herself to believe it. "We made it," she said, her voice full of relief and love. Jack smiled back. "We're not there yet, but we will be." And for the first time in a long while, Emily believed it too. It had been months since Jack first woke up, and now, the hospital room felt like a distant memory. The day Emily had feared would come, the day she would have to leave the hospital and take Jack home, was finally here. But the fear had shifted. She wasn't afraid of what awaited them outside the sterile walls anymore. She was afraid of the journey ahead. "I can't believe we're finally going home," Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. Jack was walking on his own now, though still slow, and Emily stood by him, offering support. The road to recovery had been long and grueling, but they were stronger now, more resilient. "We've come so far," Jack said, smiling at her. "But we're not done yet." Leaving the hospital felt like stepping into a new world, one where everything was both familiar and strange. The quiet hum of the hospital was replaced with the noise of the world outside, the sound of cars, people, the rush of life. Emily couldn't help but look at Jack as they made their way to the car, her heart full of both gratitude and anxiety. "Are you sure you're okay?" she asked, her voice trembling. Jack smiled faintly, but there was still an exhaustion in his eyes. "I'll be okay," he said softly. "But it's going to take time." Emily nodded, understanding that the hardest part wasn't over. The road ahead would be long, but at least they were walking it together. The first few weeks at home were a challenge. Jack was still weak, and while he could manage small tasks on his own, it was clear that he wasn't the person he had been before the accident. The once vibrant, energetic brother Emily had known was now a shadow of himself, struggling with the after-effects of his injuries. Emily tried to keep things normal, filling their home with laughter and love, but there were days when the weight of the situation was too much. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," she said one evening, her voice raw with emotion. Jack looked at her, his eyes filled with understanding. "We'll get through it," he whispered. "We always do." As the months passed, Jack slowly began to regain his strength. The days of physical therapy and hard work started to show results. He walked a little further each day, his strength returning bit by bit. There were setbacks, of course, moments when he would collapse from exhaustion, moments when the pain became too much. But there were victories too, like the first time he made it down the stairs without help, or when he cooked dinner for Emily, for the first time in months. "Look at you," Emily said with a smile, watching him from the doorway. "I'm not where I want to be yet," Jack replied, wiping sweat from his brow. "But I'm getting there." It had been a year since that fateful day in the hospital. The road to recovery had been long, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but also filled with moments of triumph and love. Jack had returned to work, though he had to take things slower than before. Emily had started to work part-time, taking care of their home and finding a new balance in their life. They had both learned how to navigate this new version of their world, one that was different but no less meaningful. "We've come a long way," Emily said one evening, as she sat with Jack on the porch. Jack smiled, his eyes soft and filled with gratitude. "And we're still going,"